50 frases com you shouldn't. 50 frases com you shouldn't. Você não deveria. Dica para memorizar: a expressão you shouldn't significa você não deveria. Ela é usada para dar conselho negativo, dar um conselho negativo, ou seja, dizer que não é uma boa ideia fazer alguma coisa. Estrutura: you shouldn't smoke. You shouldn't smoke. Você não deveria fumar. You shouldn't worry. Você não deveria se preocupar. You shouldn't worry. You shouldn't drive so fast. You shouldn't drive so fast. Você não deveria dirigir tão rápido. Então, o macete, né? A dica: should, deveria. Shouldn't, não deveria. Basta acrescentar o not, contraído, shouldn't. 50 frases. Só um minutinho. Só fazer algo aqui. Vamos lá. You shouldn't smoke. You shouldn't smoke. You shouldn't eat too much junk food. You shouldn't stay up late. You shouldn't drive too fast. You shouldn't drive too fast. You shouldn't use your phone while driving. You shouldn't use your phone while driving. You shouldn't spend all your money. You shouldn't spend all your money. You shouldn't worry so much. You shouldn't worry so much. You shouldn't get angry. You shouldn't get angry. You shouldn't interrupt people. You shouldn't interrupt people. You shouldn't lie. You shouldn't lie. You shouldn't shout. You shouldn't shout. You shouldn't stop studying. You shouldn't stop studying. You shouldn't be late. You shouldn't be late. You shouldn't skip sleep. You shouldn't skip sleep. You shouldn't eat too much sugar. You shouldn't eat too much sugar. You shouldn't drink too much soda. You shouldn't drink too much soda. You shouldn't drink too much coffee. You shouldn't eat too much coffee. You shouldn't go out in the rain without an umbrella. You shouldn't go out in the rain without an umbrella. You shouldn't forget your jacket. You shouldn't forget your jacket. You shouldn't forget your medicine. You shouldn't forget your medicine. You shouldn't give up. You shouldn't give up. You shouldn't lose hope. You shouldn't lose hope. You shouldn't keep everything to yourself. You shouldn't keep everything to yourself. You shouldn't watch too much TV. You shouldn't watch too much TV. You shouldn't play video games all day. You shouldn't play video games all day. You shouldn't sleep too little. You shouldn't sleep too little. You shouldn't ignore your health. You shouldn't ignore your health. You shouldn't forget your family. You shouldn't forget your family. You shouldn't stop reading. You, you shouldn't stop reading. You shouldn't be rude. You shouldn't be rude. You shouldn't break your promise. You shouldn't break your promise. You shouldn't speak so loudly. You shouldn't speak so loudly. You shouldn't doubt about yourself. You shouldn't doubt yourself. You shouldn't doubt yourself. You shouldn't leave the door open. You shouldn't leave the door open. You shouldn't lose your keys. You shouldn't lose your keys. You shouldn't quit your job without a plan. You shouldn't quit your job without a plan. You shouldn't quit your job without a plan. You shouldn't forget your documents. You shouldn't forget your documents. You shouldn't judge people. You shouldn't judge people. You shouldn't hurt other people. You shouldn't hurt other people. You shouldn't ignore good advice. You shouldn't ignore good advice. You shouldn't walk alone at night. You shouldn't walk alone at night. You shouldn't break the rules. You shouldn't break the rules. You shouldn't waste food. You shouldn't waste food. You shouldn't waste water. You shouldn't waste water. You shouldn't waste electricity. You shouldn't waste electricity. You shouldn't text while driving. You shouldn't text while driving. You shouldn't ignore your doctor's advice. You shouldn't ignore your doctor's advice. You shouldn't be afraid to learn. You shouldn't be afraid to learn. You shouldn't compare yourself to others. You shouldn't compare yourself to others. You shouldn't stop believing yourself. You shouldn't stop believing yourself. Dica final. Os três modais que você aprendeu até agora são extremamente usados no inglês. I have to, eu tenho que. Eu tenho que trabalhar. Uma obrigação. You should, você deveria. Conselho. You shouldn't, você não deveria. Não deixa de ser um conselho, né? Mas é mais um aspecto negativo. Você não deveria se preocupar. You shouldn't worry. Ok? Então aqui está, para não esquecer. Have to, obrigação. Should, um conselho. You shouldn't. Conselho, não deixa de ser um conselho, mas não é ideia negativa. Ok? Próximo vídeo eu vou falar mais uma vez uma revisão sobre esse conteúdo. Gostou? Deixa o like, se inscreve no canal, ativa os sininhos. Se você procurar algo mais acadêmico, vale no curso que está na bio do canal, onde tem um curso mais acadêmico, mais aprofundado para você. Deus abençoe. Bye, bye. Até a próxima. Entre no nosso grupo do WhatsApp.